What if the fairy tale we all believed in was never real to begin with? What if the woman who once charmed the world with her smile, her grace, and her carefully crafted compassion had planned every moment of it long before she ever met Prince Harry? And what if the man revealing all of it is none other than her own father? That's exactly what just happened. Thomas Markle has stunned the entire United Kingdom, and, frankly, the entire world. With a revelation so shocking, so personal, that even the most loyal supporters of Meghan Markle were left speechless. According to Thomas, Meghan once told him something that now feels chilling in hindsight. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. She said she would use Harry to become Princess Diana 2.0. Those are his words. And for many, they're enough to shatter the illusion of a modern royal love story. The story you're about to hear isn't about gossip or headlines. It's about a father and daughter, once inseparable, now worlds apart. It's about ambition, fame, and the dangerous pursuit of becoming a legend at any cost. But it's also about something deeper. How the shadow of Princess Diana still looms over the British monarchy, decades after her death, haunting every move her youngest son and his wife make. Before we dive in, I want you to imagine this. A father, sitting alone in his modest Mexican home, holding old photographs of a smiling little girl in pigtails. The same girl who once hugged him tightly before school, who once said, "Daddy, one day I'll make you proud." That little girl is now one of the most talked about women in the world. And that father, heartbroken, estranged, and ignored, is finally speaking out, not out of spite, but out of despair. But what exactly did Meghan say to him? When did she say it? And what did she mean by Princess Diana 2.0? Stay with me, because the truth may be darker than you think. This story matters now more than ever. Not just because of Thomas's revelation, but because it comes at a time when the royal family is more divided, more fragile, and more exposed than it has ever been. King Charles is battling health rumors. Prince William is fighting to preserve the dignity of the crown. And Harry, caught between loyalty and love, seems more isolated than ever. And then there's Meghan. Her every move, every public appearance, every business deal is now being dissected. The once beloved Duchess who walked away from royal duty now faces whispers of manipulation, deceit, and a grand plan that may have begun long before she ever stepped into Buckingham Palace. So tonight, we're going back to the beginning. To understand what Thomas meant and why his words are sending shockwaves through Britain, you have to understand their story. Once upon a time, Meghan Markle wasn't a duchess. She was a girl from Los Angeles, raised by two very different parents. Her father, Thomas Markle, worked long hours behind the scenes in television production, lighting sets for shows like Married with Children. He provided stability, routine, and dreams. He wasn't rich, but he was devoted. Meghan, by his account, adored him. She often told classmates that her father worked in Hollywood. He paid for her private schooling. He encouraged her acting dreams. And when she landed her first minor role, he was the first to call and congratulate her. But something changed. Fame has a way of rewiring relationships, especially when ambition outpaces gratitude. By the time Meghan was in her mid-20s, she was on the verge of breaking through in Hollywood. Thomas says she began to distance herself, becoming more polished, more private, and less connected to the man who had once driven her to auditions in an old car. Still, he was proud. He told friends, "That's my girl. She's going to do great things." Then, in 2016, Meghan met Prince Harry. And according to Thomas, that's when everything began to shift. When Meghan called her father to tell him she was dating a prince, he was ecstatic. He thought his daughter had found love, that she'd finally met someone who would cherish her. But soon after, Thomas claims he noticed something strange in her tone. Her words, he says, were calculated. She wasn't just falling in love, she was strategizing. In one of their phone conversations, he says Meghan laughed and said something that didn't sit right with him. She told him she was going to use Harry to become Princess Diana 2.0. At the time, he brushed it off. He thought she was joking, being playful. After all, Meghan had always admired Diana. As a child, she watched Diana's humanitarian work on television. She had even kept magazines with her pictures. Every girl wanted to be Diana back then, Thomas recalled. But now, looking back, He believes that comment wasn't just admiration, it was a mission statement. And that's where this story begins to twist. Because when Meghan stepped into the royal world, she didn't just step into a marriage, she stepped into a role that millions recognized and billions still mourned. Diana's spirit wasn't just part of royal history, it was an emotional wound that never fully healed. Harry had lost his mother at 12. The trauma was public, the grief was endless. And into that vulnerable heart walked a woman who, according to her own father, had already studied the role she wanted to play. Now, before you assume this is just another bitter father lashing out, let's pause. Let's remember who Thomas Markle is. He's not a journalist or a social climber. He's a retired lighting director, a man who spent most of his life behind the camera, not in front of it. For years, he stayed silent while tabloids ripped him apart. He was accused of staging paparazzi photos, of lying, of being an opportunist. But listen closely, and you'll hear something deeper in his interviews. Not malice, but heartbreak. Because this isn't a man trying to destroy his daughter's reputation. This is a man trying to make sense of how he lost her. When he says Meghan told him she would use Harry, the word use carries a weight. It's cold. It's strategic. It suggests that love was not the primary motive. And that's what makes his confession so devastating. Think about it. A father realizing his daughter might have viewed one of the most sacred unions in royal history as a career move. But here's where the story turns again. In Meghan's world, image is everything. She built her public persona on compassion, empowerment, and authenticity. Yet, behind that image, Thomas claims, was an obsession with control. She was always good at creating a narrative, he said in one interview. Even as a teenager, she could convince anyone of anything. That's what made her a great actress. But that's also what scares me now. And maybe he's right. Because when you look at Meghan's journey, from Hollywood to the palace, from royal exile to Netflix royalty, you start to see a pattern. Every chapter of her life has been about reinvention. First, she was the hardworking actress. Then, the fairy tale bride. Then, the wrong duchess. Now, she's the self-made, global figure, free from royal restraint. Each version of Meghan is crafted, precise, and designed to fit the narrative of the moment. But here's the chilling thought. If she truly did plan to become Princess Diana 2.0, then every tear, every interview, every carefully chosen soundbite could have been part of a long game, a story decades in the making. And the more you look, the more eerie similarities you find. The emotional tell-all interviews, the media battles, the us against the institution framing. Even the choice of outfits, poses, and quotes seem to mirror Diana's public journey. Coincidence? Maybe. But Thomas Markle says otherwise. He claims his daughter knew exactly what she was doing, and that her words, spoken in confidence years ago, were not idle talk. So why speak now? Why would Thomas risk more public humiliation, more backlash, and more attacks from Meghan's fans? Because, as he puts it, the truth matters more than silence. It's been years since he's heard her voice. His letters go unanswered, his apologies ignored. He's watched from afar as his daughter built an empire, while the man who raised her was written out of her story like he never existed. And that's what makes his confession so emotionally heavy. He isn't just revealing a secret, he's releasing years of pain. But if Thomas's story is true, then Meghan's calculated transformation into a global symbol wasn't an accident. It was destiny by design. And that leads us to a much bigger question. If Meghan really saw Harry as a means to become Diana's successor, what does that say about their marriage? About Harry's devotion? About the royal brand itself? Because history has a strange way of repeating itself. Diana once said, "There were 3 of us in this marriage." And now, some wonder if, metaphorically, there still are. The ghost of Diana lingers, not just in memory, but in marketing, in storytelling, in the very way the world sees Meghan Markle. As Thomas sits quietly, holding the last photo he took with his daughter, one can't help but feel the tragedy of it all. This isn't just about scandal. It's about how love, ambition, and pain can twist into something unrecognizable. But the story doesn't end here. Because what Thomas revealed was only the beginning. He would soon go on to describe conversations, letters, and moments that revealed just how deep this Princess Diana 2.0 plan may have gone. And if you think his first revelation was shocking, Wait until you hear what came next, because that's when everything began to unravel. Thomas says he ignored the signs at first. He told himself Meghan was just ambitious. He told himself she was in love. But then, days before the royal wedding, he got a phone call that made his heart sink, a call that confirmed his worst fears. And that call would become the moment the father of the bride realized he might never recognize his daughter again. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming that he wasn't invited. Not to the rehearsal dinner, not to the photo sessions, not even to the moment he dreamed of for years, walking his daughter down the aisle. Imagine that for a second. The man who paid her tuition, who worked 12-hour shifts behind hot studio lights so she could attend private schools and acting classes, sat in a small rented home thousands of miles away, watching the royal wedding on television like a stranger. His daughter, his pride and joy, was marrying a prince, and he was nowhere to be found. Thomas Markle's story doesn't begin with bitterness. It begins with pride. He was a man who spent most of his life behind the camera, not in front of it. He didn't crave fame, he chased stability. Working on sets like Married, with Children, and General Hospital, he was part of the crew that made others shine. When Meghan came along in 1981, his world shifted completely. He wasn't just a technician anymore. He was a father, a protector, a provider. Friends who knew Thomas back then described him as soft-spoken, endlessly patient, and fiercely proud of his little girl. He called her Flower. On weekends, he'd take her to the sets where he worked, introducing her to the magic of cameras and lights. Meghan loved it. She'd sit on his lap and ask questions about everything. "What's that light for?" she'd ask, pointing. Thomas would explain patiently, telling her that lighting was what made people beautiful, what made stories come alive. In many ways, it was prophetic. Lighting made her beautiful, and stories would one day define her entire life. Thomas's relationship with Meghan was, by all accounts, tender and close. After his divorce from Doria Ragland, he took on much of the parenting himself. Meghan split her time between her mother's spiritual, free-spirited home and her father's structured, grounded world. Two very different influences, one emotional, one practical. But Thomas was always constant. He paid for her Catholic school, her theater lessons, and later, her first headshots. Even when money got tight, he never complained. When Meghan landed her first small role in General Hospital, he sent her flowers with a note that said, "You did it, Flower. I'm proud of you." But Hollywood has a way of changing people, doesn't it? Success doesn't arrive quietly. It whispers promises and slowly pulls you away from those who knew you before the cameras. Meghan's rise was modest at first, but as her role in Suits began gaining traction, Thomas noticed something subtle but unmistakable. The phone calls became shorter. The conversations less personal. She still called him Dad, but there was a new distance in her tone, a polish, a script. She started sounding like someone giving an interview, he later said. Even to me. He didn't think much of it then. He thought she was just busy, adjusting to fame. But it was the beginning of a gradual erosion, one that would end with silence. As Meghan's public profile grew, so did her image. She became the humanitarian, the voice for gender equality, the ambassador for compassion. Thomas watched from afar, proud but puzzled. "That wasn't the Meghan I raised," he told a friend. "She was always kind, yes, but she was also ambitious. She knew exactly what she wanted. She wasn't naive." He admired that about her, until ambition began to replace affection. By the time she met Prince Harry, Thomas had been mostly sidelined from her world. Their contact was limited, but she still called to share the big news. He remembers that call vividly, the excitement, the nervous laughter. "Dad, you're not going to believe this," she said. "I'm dating Prince Harry." Thomas was stunned. He joked that he hoped the prince was ready for a real Los Angeles family. Meghan laughed. But beneath the laughter, Thomas sensed something calculated. She spoke about what the relationship could mean. She didn't say love first, she said change. In interviews, Thomas would later describe how quickly things accelerated after that. Overnight, his quiet suburban life became the target of paparazzi. Strangers knocked on his door. Tabloids camped outside his street. His mailbox overflowed with letters. "It was like a storm hit," he said. "One day I was just Meghan's dad. The next, I was the father of a future duchess." He wasn't prepared for that kind of spotlight. He wasn't trained to navigate media traps. He made mistakes, including the infamous staged paparazzi photos. But in his mind, it wasn't for money or fame. I wanted to look presentable, he said. I didn't want the world to see me as some scruffy old man. The British tabloids didn't see it that way. They ripped him apart, calling him desperate, greedy, even complicit in undermining his daughter's image. Meghan's camp went silent. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was as if a wall had gone up between them overnight. And when his health began to fail, when he suffered chest pains days before the royal wedding, the silence grew even louder. That's the part that haunts him most. He had prepared his suit. He had written his speech. He was ready to walk her down the aisle. But instead, as he lay in a hospital bed recovering from heart surgery, the world watched another man escort her. Prince Charles, the groom's father. Thomas Markle, the man who raised her, was reduced to a headline. Meghan's father too ill to attend. But behind that headline was heartbreak, because Thomas had tried to reach her. He texted, he called, he begged for a response. Nothing came back. And then, one night before the wedding, he received a phone call. The number was blocked, but he recognized the voice immediately. It was Meghan, except she didn't sound like his daughter anymore. The tone was formal, distant, almost rehearsed. She told him not to speak to the press. She told him he had embarrassed her. She said she didn't know if it was appropriate for him to attend the wedding anymore. Thomas was speechless. "I'm your father," he said softly. There was a pause, a long one. Then came her reply, cold and final. "I have to protect my image now." Those words hit him harder than any headline ever could. My image. Not my family. Not my health. Not us. Just my image. That was the moment Thomas Markle realized he'd been written out of the story. He watched the wedding alone, his heart monitor beeping softly in the background. Millions celebrated a union that symbolized modern love and progress. Meghan smiled, radiant, flawless, the world's cameras locked on her. But behind that perfection, somewhere in the back of her mind, Thomas believes she knew he was watching, and that she didn't care. For him, the wedding wasn't a fairy tale. It was a funeral, the quiet burial of their relationship. Afterward, things only got worse. Meghan and Harry's royal life became a global phenomenon. Interviews, tours, charity events, their faces were everywhere. Thomas tried to reach out again, sending letters, voicemails, birthday cards. No response, not even a text. He pleaded through intermediaries, through the press, even publicly. He told newspapers he just wanted to talk, not to fight. Each time, silence. In one of his most painful admissions, he said, "I didn't lose a daughter. I lost a stranger who looks like her." The world may see Thomas Markle as bitter, but those close to him describe something else: grief. The grief of being erased by the person you loved most. The grief of seeing your daughter live out her dreams while pretending you don't exist. And yet, even through that heartbreak, he never lashed out with pure hatred. Instead, his tone was always one of confusion, trying to understand how the girl he raised became the woman who shut him out. "She used to call me her best friend," he said once. "Now I'm her burden." Still, there's something deeper beneath that sorrow: guilt. Thomas believes that maybe, just maybe, he helped create the very woman who would abandon him. He gave her the tools, the confidence, the discipline, the understanding of image. "She learned how to light herself," he once said, half smiling. "I taught her that. I told her lighting can make anyone look like an angel." And perhaps, without realizing it, he taught her how to light her life that way too. To manipulate the angles, control the glow, and decide who stood in the shadows. But then came something no one expected. After years of silence, Thomas received a message through a mutual acquaintance, someone who had worked with Meghan in her early career. It wasn't from Meghan herself, but it hinted that she was rewriting her family story for upcoming media projects. That's when he understood. She wasn't just avoiding him. She was erasing him from the narrative. To the public, Meghan was now the daughter of a struggling single mother who overcame hardship through sheer will. Thomas was reduced to a footnote, a complication, a tabloid villain. The father who once lit Hollywood sets was now cast in darkness. He felt betrayed, but more than that, disposable. In one interview, his voice broke as he said, "I never thought my daughter would see me as bad for her brand." And that's the tragic irony. Thomas Markle, The man who once worked to make others shine now found himself permanently dimmed by his own creation. Yet deep down, he still hoped. He kept her childhood photos on his nightstand. He watched every interview, every appearance. He searched her eyes for a trace of the girl he raised. But each time, he saw someone else, someone who reminded him less of the Meghan he knew and more of someone else entirely. Someone royal, someone tragic, Princess Diana. And that's when the pieces started to click for him. Her mannerisms, her words, even the way she tilted her head during interviews, all eerily familiar. At first, he dismissed it as coincidence. Then he remembered that long-ago conversation, the one he had brushed off as a joke. Her words echoed again in his mind. "I'm going to use Harry to become Princess Diana 2.0. It haunted him. Because as he watched her on TV, as the crowd chanted her name and the headlines hailed her as the People's Duchess, he realized that maybe she wasn't chasing love at all. Maybe she was chasing legacy. That realization crushed him more than any public feud ever could. His daughter's dream wasn't to be loved, it was to be remembered. And as Thomas looked around his small, quiet home filled with old photos and unanswered letters, he knew he'd been left behind. Not because he failed her, but because he no longer fit into her script. Still, one question burned in his mind. If Meghan truly saw herself as the second coming of Diana, how far was she willing to go to make it happen? The answer, as he would soon discover, was far beyond what anyone imagined. Because the next time he heard her name, it wasn't from a family friend. It was from a royal insider who told him something chilling. Meghan's admiration for Diana had become something else entirely. Something dangerous. Something that went beyond inspiration, into imitation. And that realization would lead Thomas down a path that would reveal just how deliberate Meghan's Princess Diana 2.0 plan really was. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It wasn't an argument. It was a revelation. That's how Thomas Markle describes the phone call that changed everything. The call that would forever redefine his relationship with Meghan. He remembers the day vividly, not because it was dramatic or loud, but because it was so eerily calm. The air was still, the sun was beginning to set over Rosarito, and he had just finished his usual evening routine. A sandwich, a cup of coffee, and an old television rerun humming in the background. His phone buzzed, and when he saw the name flash across the screen, his heart skipped. Meg. He hadn't spoken to her in weeks. Not since the paparazzi scandal broke. Not since the tabloids began painting him as the man who humiliated his daughter before the royal wedding. He thought, hoped, she was finally calling to make peace, to ask how he was doing, to talk like they used to. But as soon as he picked up, he knew something was wrong. Her voice wasn't soft or affectionate. It was tight, clipped, almost rehearsed. There was no "Hi, Dad," no warmth, just silence for a few seconds. Then, "You've embarrassed me." Those 3 words cut deeper than she could have known. Thomas tried to explain, tried to tell her that he hadn't meant for the photos to cause trouble, that he'd been tricked, that the press had manipulated him. But she wasn't listening. Her tone grew colder with every word. "You made me look bad," she said. "You made us look bad." "Us?" he asked. "Harry and me." For a moment, Thomas just sat there, stunned. There was no concern for his health, no mention of the heart procedure he'd just undergone, no acknowledgement of the fact that he was still recovering. Only anger, sharp, defensive, royal anger. He told her he was proud of her, that all he ever wanted was to see her happy. He even apologized again, hoping that maybe, just maybe, the daughter he loved would come back through the phone. But what she said next shattered that hope. "I can't talk to you anymore," she said. "It's too risky. You don't understand how this world works." That sentence would replay in his mind for years. You don't understand how this world works. What world was she talking about? The royal world? The media world? Or something else entirely? The carefully constructed world she was building piece by piece? Thomas remembers gripping the phone, speechless. He wanted to scream, to ask her who she was becoming, to tell her she was losing herself. But then her tone shifted again, low and deliberate. "I have to protect my image, Dad. You need to let me handle things from here." He fell silent. The room felt smaller. His chest tightened. And then she said it, the line that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Harry and I are the new Diana and Charles. Only this time, I'll make sure the ending's different." At first, he didn't understand what she meant. He even chuckled nervously, thinking she was being dramatic. But then she added, "You'll see. I'll be the next Diana, but I'll do it right." He froze. Every sound in the room disappeared. The clock ticking, the TV murmuring. All he could hear was her voice, confident, unshaken. She wasn't joking. She wasn't fantasizing. She was declaring something. That moment, he says, was when he realized the Meghan he knew was gone, replaced by someone else, someone who believed her life was a story to be rewritten, and she was both the author and the hero. Thomas tried to reason with her. "Meg, Diana's story ended in tragedy. You don't want that. You don't need to be anyone else." Her reply was chilling. She was misunderstood. "I'll make sure people see me the way they should have seen her." There was something in her tone, not admiration, but conviction, as if she believed she had inherited a mission, not a legacy. Thomas tried again, asking if Harry knew she felt this way. She didn't answer. Instead, she said, "I have to go. Don't call me anymore. It's safer that way." And then the line went dead. Thomas sat there for a long time, staring at his reflection in the dark TV screen. He could still hear her voice echoing, calm, detached, almost prophetic. "I'll be the next Diana." At that moment, something inside him broke. It wasn't just disappointment or anger, it was fear. Fear for what she might do to achieve that dream. He called her back. No answer. He texted her. Nothing. Days passed. Weeks. And when he finally tried again, the number had been disconnected. She was gone. In the months that followed, the world was swept up in royal euphoria. Meghan Markle, the American actress, the humanitarian, the woman who stole a prince's heart, was now the Duchess of Sussex. The press called her the new Diana, without knowing how close that comparison hit to home. Thomas watched the coverage from his living room, his hand trembling as he turned up the volume. Every headline, every flattering article, every moment she smiled into the camera, it all felt surreal. She had done it. She had become the world's darling. And yet, for Thomas, that success carried a bitter aftertaste. Because behind every headline, he saw a plan unfolding. The calculated gestures, the emotional pauses, the curated vulnerability. He recognized the performance. He'd seen her practice those looks in the mirror as a teenager before her first auditions. "You have to make them feel what you want them to feel," she once told him. And now, it seemed, she was doing just that. Only this time, the audience was global. Then came the moment that made his stomach drop. Meghan's first official royal engagement after the wedding, the visit to the Grenfell Tower survivors. She arrived dressed in neutral tones, minimal makeup, comforting the victims with soft touches and sympathetic eyes. The press called her angelic, graceful, and reminiscent of Diana. Thomas saw the photos and whispered to himself, "She's doing it." But the world wasn't ready to believe him. When he tried to warn people that Meghan's transformation was deliberate, he was called bitter, jealous, even delusional. They said he was making things up for money. They said he didn't understand how fame worked. But he remembered her words, "You don't understand how this world works," and realized maybe they were right. Because the world she was talking about wasn't ordinary. It was the world of perception, control, and image building, and she was mastering it. Then came the second call. Months later, late one evening, he received another number he didn't recognize. He answered, half expecting it to be a reporter again. But this time, it was Meghan's voice, colder, sharper, with a tone that didn't sound human anymore. "I told you not to talk to the press," she said. "Now you've made things worse." Thomas tried to explain, to beg her to talk privately, but she cut him off. "You've chosen your side." "My side?" he asked. "Yes," she said flatly. "And it's not mine." That was the moment Thomas realized this wasn't just about family anymore. This was about loyalty, and in Meghan's world, loyalty wasn't earned through love. It was demanded through silence. The call lasted only 2 minutes, but when it ended, Thomas knew what it meant. He wasn't her father anymore. He was an obstacle, a risk, a loose end that needed to be erased from the script. From that day forward, he stopped trying to call her. Instead, he started writing letters. Some were apologies, some were pleas, and some were warnings about the path she was on, about how playing the role of Princess Diana 2.0 could destroy her the same way it destroyed the real one. None were answered, but something strange happened not long after. A journalist reached out to him with a quote from an unnamed palisade. The quote read, "Meghan has studied Diana for years, not just her interviews, but her movements, her tone, her eyes. She knows exactly what she's doing." When Thomas read that line, his blood ran cold, because it confirmed what he had feared since that first call. His daughter's transformation wasn't organic. It was scripted. He looked at the photos again. Meghan waving from the car window, touching her stomach during pregnancy appearances, gazing softly into Harry's eyes. Every move was deliberate, emotionally choreographed, perfectly executed for maximum sympathy. To the world, it was endearing. To Thomas, it was chilling. He once told a reporter, "It's like she's become the role, and she doesn't know how to stop acting." And yet, there was one thing Thomas never revealed until recently. The part of that first phone call that no one knew about. After she said she'd become the next Diana, there was a pause. Then, almost as an afterthought, she whispered something that made his heart sink deeper than ever. "I'll make people love me the way they loved her, even if I have to make them hate everyone else first." That line didn't just shock him, it terrified him, because he knew what it meant. He'd seen that drive in her before, even as a teenager. The determination to win every argument, to control every narrative, to always come out on top. But this time, the stakes weren't an audition or a school play. This was the royal family. Thomas didn't tell anyone about that line for years. He said he kept it to himself because he wanted to believe she didn't mean it. But deep down, he knew she did. And now, as he watches the aftermath, the royal rifts, the public feuds, the interviews, the memoirs, the endless cycle of scandal, he knows that phone call wasn't just a family argument. It was a prophecy. But what Thomas didn't know then was that Meghan's obsession with Diana didn't stop at admiration or imitation. It went deeper, much deeper, because soon after that call, he would learn that Meghan had been keeping something personal, something she never wanted him to see. A collection that proved her fascination with Princess Diana wasn't a passing interest, it was an obsession. And that discovery would send chills through even her most devoted supporters. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. She collected magazines obsessively. Every cover featuring Princess Diana was cut out and stored carefully in binders. Every interview, every public appearance, every word she could find, Meghan devoured it. And according to Thomas Markle, she wasn't just fascinated, she was learning. She wanted to understand Diana's moves, Thomas said in a recent interview. How she spoke, how she held herself, how she smiled at cameras, she watched it all. It wasn't admiration alone. It was a blueprint. Imagine a young girl, living in Los Angeles, who spent hours studying the life of a woman she had never met in person. For most, it would be harmless fascination, a childhood crush on celebrity culture. But for Meghan, Thomas claims, it went far deeper. It was strategy. It was preparation. From the time she was a teenager, Meghan had a unique ability to absorb behavior and replicate it. Friends remember her mimicking accents, practicing interview responses, and even adopting Diana-like expressions when discussing humanitarian work and school projects. Teachers recalled she had a presence that demanded attention, a charisma beyond her years. And Thomas saw this as part of her drive, her determination to succeed in Hollywood. But he says the obsession with Diana carried a shadow, a desire to step into someone else's story and claim it as her own. It wasn't just that she liked Diana, Thomas said. It was that she wanted to be Diana, but better, smarter, more in control. She told me once, "Dad, if I do it right, I can be the next Diana, but this time, I'll write the ending." Pause for a moment and think about that. The girl he raised, the same girl who once clung to his arm as they walked through school gates, was envisioning herself as a replacement for one of the most beloved figures in the world. Not as herself, but as someone else. Thomas remembers the first time he truly realized the depth of this obsession. Meghan had been home for a weekend between acting jobs, and she brought out a collection of Diana interviews. They sat together, watching the footage, analyzing every gesture. Her notes were meticulous, a catalog of behavior patterns, audience reactions, and media response strategies. She was teaching herself how to move like her, Thomas said. It wasn't natural. It was rehearsed. It was calculated. And the more Thomas observed, the more uneasy he became. This wasn't typical teenage admiration. This was planning. And the signs were everywhere. There was the way Meghan always positioned herself in photographs. The slight tilt of the head, the soft but commanding gaze, the delicate smile that conveyed empathy while also suggesting strength. It was uncanny. Even her wardrobe choices hinted at deliberate alignment with Diana's iconic looks, classic silhouettes, neutral tones, and strategic use of color to convey authority or approachability. He didn't just copy, one former family friend told a reporter. She analyzed and then improved. It was as if she wanted to take the best parts of Diana and add a modern twist. More control, more power, more influence. The obsession carried into her humanitarian efforts. School projects became mock press conferences. Volunteer work was rehearsed with friends. Everything was a practice for a life she envisioned long before the palace would even exist. Thomas remembers a particularly chilling moment. Meghan had been volunteering at a local charity and returned home beaming. "Dad," she said, "this is practice for the real thing. If I can make people feel this way about me now, imagine when I'm on a global stage." He laughed nervously. "You're just a kid, Meg." She shook her head. "No, Dad. I'm already planning ahead. I have to make them see me the way they should have seen her." That line stuck with him. The way they should have seen her. Not Diana herself, Meghan, his daughter, his little girl. And yet, in her mind, she was measuring herself against someone she never met, someone whose life ended tragically, someone whose legacy she believed she could rewrite. Thomas tried to steer her away from that obsession. He reminded her that Diana's life was tragic, that fame came with consequences, that no one could perfectly emulate someone else. But Meghan would simply nod and smile, as if listening but already charting her own path. She was never going to be stopped, Thomas said. Even as a child, she had this determination that bordered on ruthless. She wanted to win. She wanted to be admired. And she wanted to control how people saw her. As Meghan matured, the Diana obsession didn't fade. It evolved. In Hollywood, she was studying not just Diana, but the press, public perception, and media strategy. She became an expert in narrative control. Interviews were practiced. Appearances were curated. The girl who once pretended to be a news anchor for fun was now rehearsing how to captivate audiences on a global scale. By the time she met Prince Harry, Thomas noticed a shift. This wasn't just a woman pursuing love. This was a woman executing a plan. And that phone call, the one where she declared she would become Princess Diana 2.0, confirmed his fears. The obsession that started with magazines and mirror rehearsals had become something larger, something dangerous. It was during this period that Thomas first realized Meghan's fascination with Diana was more than professional or personal admiration. It was identity shaping. She wasn't just inspired by Diana. She was internalizing her essence, absorbing her mannerisms, her tragedies, her public image, and intending to use them strategically. For Thomas, it was heartbreaking. He had raised a confident, ambitious, and intelligent daughter, but now he saw her ambition veering into imitation. The Meghan he knew, the girl who laughed at cartoons with him, who clung to him when scared, who dreamed of acting and making a difference in the world. She seemed to be disappearing, replaced by someone performing a role with a precision that terrified him. Even when Meghan became engaged to Harry, Thomas noticed it. Not in public appearances, but in private moments when she spoke to him. She referenced Diana, not affectionately, but analytically. She mentioned how Diana had handled the press, how she'd maintained grace, how the world had expected her to be perfect. Meghan was planning to do the same, but better. Thomas described one of these private moments in an interview. Meghan had sat with him one evening, her gaze intense, as she spoke about the upcoming royal wedding. She said, "I know exactly what I have to do." The world loved Diana because she was relatable, vulnerable, and tragic. I have to embody those traits, but I have to control the outcome. I can't let tragedy happen again. He shivered when recalling her words. It wasn't a daughter confiding in a father. It was a strategist explaining her plan to execute a global narrative. And yet, what made it most frightening wasn't her ambition. It was the clarity of her vision. She had thought through the entire arc, from the courtship to the wedding, to public appearances, to interviews, down to the subtle emotional cues she would use. Every gesture, every smile, every tear would be deliberate. Thomas tried to reason with her. "Meg, this isn't acting. This is your life. You can't control everything. People will love you for you. not for Diana. She had smiled. A soft, almost imperceptible smile, and said, "That's where you're wrong, Dad. People will only love me if I give them what they want. And I know exactly what they want." The realization hit Thomas like a punch. She wasn't just chasing Diana's legacy. She was creating one of her own, built on imitation, manipulation, and performance. And he was powerless to stop it. Even today, when Thomas looks back at that period, he says he can't separate admiration from obsession. It wasn't just role modeling, he said. It was preparation. She was learning to become the woman the world would adore, and I don't know if anyone could have predicted how far she would go. And the strangest part? Thomas admits that part of him admired it. The cleverness, the strategic mind, the ability to captivate and command attention. That was his daughter. That intelligence, that charisma, was exactly what had made him proud all those years. But now, the same qualities that made him proud filled him with dread. Because when Meghan declared she would become Princess Diana 2.0, he realized it wasn't metaphorical. It wasn't a passing remark. It was a blueprint, a guide, a plan that she intended to execute meticulously. And what Thomas feared most wasn't just the global scrutiny or the royal backlash. It was the personal cost, the way she would inevitably alienate those who loved her, including him. But as he would soon find out, the obsession wasn't confined to private conversation. The world would start to see glimpses of it. In carefully orchestrated charity appearances, in public interviews, in the way she carried herself during pregnancy, and in the tiny yet deliberate gestures that mirrored Diana's every move. Thomas was left watching from the sidelines, powerless and heartbroken, while his daughter enacted her plan with precision. And what he discovered next, the evidence she left behind in journals, notes, and private communications, would shock even those who had long suspected Meghan's admiration for Diana, because admiration had turned into something far more calculated and far more dangerous. But what came next would prove that this obsession wasn't just a quirk of childhood or a fascination with fame. It was a deliberate, lifelong strategy that would change the royal family forever. Millions watched. Cameras flashed. The world held its breath. But for Thomas Markle, the man who raised Meghan, the royal wedding wasn't a fairy tale. It was a heartbreak unfolding in slow motion. The day had begun like any other in London, but Thomas was thousands of miles away in Rosarito, Mexico. His chest still tender from recent heart surgery, he had been advised not to travel. But the thought of seeing his daughter walk down the aisle, even on a screen, had given him hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, he could feel part of the day in some way. He woke early, the room quiet except for the soft hum of a fan and the distant waves crashing against the shore. He dressed carefully, a gray suit, polished shoes, a tie he had chosen specifically for the occasion. He wanted to look respectable, not for the cameras, but for Meghan. He wanted her to know that her father was there in spirit, even if not in person. But as the hours ticked by, reality sank in. He would not be attending. And the reason, in his eyes, was heartbreakingly clear. He had been written out. The world celebrated Meghan's arrival at St. George's Chapel, Kensington Palace, streaming live footage to millions. She appeared radiant, a vision in white, every detail of her dress meticulously captured by the press. But as Thomas watched, a pang of loss cut through him. He had chosen her childhood photo album to keep him company during the day, images of birthdays, school plays, family holidays. The little girl he had once tucked into bed, the little girl who had called him her hero, was now the center of global attention, and he was absent. According to Thomas, it was not just the absence that hurt, but the way it felt orchestrated. "I wasn't sick in a way that should have stopped me," he said in a later interview. "They made me irrelevant. I wasn't part of her story anymore." He had received the call days earlier. Meghan, in her clipped, formal tone, had told him to step back. That he had embarrassed her. That his presence could jeopardize her image. And for Thomas, the irony was unbearable. He had spent a lifetime building sets, arranging lights, creating stories, and now his own daughter had turned him into a ghost, erased from the scene entirely. He watched the ceremony on television, the officiants' voices echoing in his small apartment. Every laugh, every tear, every public gaze of Harry and Meghan felt like a blade. He saw Harry's hands shaking as he waited for Meghan at the altar. The prince, so young, so vulnerable, so deeply in love, unaware, perhaps, of the full extent of the role his bride had scripted for herself. The images of Meghan walking down the aisle were haunting. Her eyes scanned the crowd, her smile soft yet calculated. She carried herself with the grace of someone who had spent years studying a predecessor, someone who had mastered the art of public perception. And Thomas saw the unmistakable traces of Diana in her movements. The head tilt, the slight, empathetic nod, the way she allowed her gaze to linger, drawing attention while maintaining control. Thomas admits that it was this precision that hurt him most. The little girl who once clung to his arm on ordinary walks through Los Angeles streets had become an icon by design. Her transformation wasn't organic. It was meticulous, and he had been sidelined from witnessing it firsthand. In the hours following the ceremony, the media frenzy intensified. Paparazzi images captured every angle, commentators praised her poise, and the internet erupted with hashtags celebrating the People's Duchess. Thomas, however, was left with a bitter taste of reality. He wasn't part of any headlines. He wasn't part of any celebrations. To the world, he barely existed. Even worse, friends of the family noticed the shift. Those who had once known Meghan as the vivacious, affectionate daughter now described a woman completely focused on her image, her narrative, and her public persona. She was always charming, one family friend said. But now it was like she had rehearsed every reaction. Every smile was on cue. Thomas tried to reach her after the wedding. He sent letters, emails, and even tried contacting mutual acquaintances who could mediate. Each attempt was met with silence or redirection. He realized, painfully, that his daughter was deliberately distancing herself, not just physically, but emotionally, psychologically, and publicly. And then came the moments that made the fracture feel permanent. The first family photos released after the wedding showed Meghan and Harry in radiant poses, smiles perfectly timed, bodies angled just so. Thomas, when he saw the images, felt an almost physical pang. He had taught her how to pose for cameras as a child. Now, she had mastered it to perfection, and he was excluded. His grief wasn't just personal. It was public. Every reporter who called asked the same question. How does it feel to be left out of your daughter's wedding? Every tabloid headline seemed to mock his absence. Meghan's father too ill to attend. The man who raised a duchess. He tried to explain the truth. It wasn't just illness that kept him away. It was exclusion. I wasn't invited, he said bitterly. I was told to stay home. To not embarrass her. And that's exactly what they did. They embarrassed me. Not publicly, but privately. In the deepest, most painful way. Thomas recalls the evening of the wedding as one of profound isolation. While the world celebrated, he sat in silence, surrounded by mementos of their shared past. Childhood drawings, family photos, letters she had written when she was younger. Each one a reminder of what had been lost. The grief was compounded by frustration. He had raised a daughter who was intelligent, charismatic, and compassionate. He had instilled in her values of hard work, respect, and empathy. And yet, she had turned her abilities toward a strategy that sidelined him entirely. It wasn't just about being left out. It was about what that exclusion represented. To Thomas, it signaled a profound shift. His daughter was no longer the girl he had raised. She was someone performing a role. A role that required sacrifice, including the sacrifice of family bonds. And yet, even amidst this heartbreak, Thomas held on to a shred of hope. Hope that she would see him, that she would remember the little girl he had guided, the daughter he had loved unconditionally. But as days turned into weeks, that hope faded. Calls went unanswered. Letters were ignored. And he began to understand that the wedding had not just celebrated a marriage, it had cemented a transformation. She was now a duchess. She was now a global figure. And he was nowhere to be found. The final blow came when he learned how meticulously she had planned every detail of the wedding. Not just the dress, the flowers, or the guest list, but the optics. According to palace insiders, Meghan had reviewed media angles, suggested seating arrangements to control visibility, and even timed interactions to maximize emotional impact. Every move was calculated, every moment choreographed. Thomas realized then that his daughter's obsession with Diana was no longer a private fascination. It was a public strategy. The girl he raised had become a master of perception, and he had been written out of the narrative entirely. And in that realization came a deeper fear. If Meghan could orchestrate this much for her wedding, what else might she have planned? What other aspects of her Princess Diana 2.0 persona were being executed behind the scenes? It was a question that haunted him. But the most shocking part, Thomas would later reveal, wasn't what Meghan had done publicly. It was what she had confided to him privately, long before the wedding, in a voice that was calm, deliberate, and terrifyingly certain. "Dad, I'm going to use Harry to become Princess Diana 2.0. Those words echoed in his mind as he watched the world cheer. And he realized something that chilled him to the core. He might never see the little girl he raised again. Because she wasn't just performing a royal role. She was rewriting the story, and he was nothing more than a footnote. And what he discovered next, the letters, interviews, and private communications that followed, would reveal the full extent of how meticulously Meghan had plotted her transformation. But what came next would shock even those who had long believed in her charm and charisma, and it would mark the point where the royal fairy tale truly began to unravel. It was supposed to be private, a letter written with care, love, and the hope of reconciliation. But in the world of Meghan Markle, privacy is fragile, fleeting, and often a liability. What started as a personal correspondence between father and daughter soon spiraled into a legal battle that shook the tabloids, stunned the royal family, and left Thomas Markle feeling powerless, betrayed, and deeply wounded. The story begins months after the royal wedding. Thomas had tried everything to reconnect with his daughter. He had written letters, each carefully crafted with the hope of mending their fractured relationship. He sent emails. He left voicemails. He even enlisted family friends to help broker a conversation. Nothing worked. Meghan remained silent. Her world had shifted into one of public performance, carefully curated appearances, and strategic communication. Private pleas, personal apologies, and fatherly love were met with nothing but distance. So, in his frustration and heartbreak, Thomas made a choice. He would write a letter, a real, honest, raw letter. No advisors, no PR consultants, just a father reaching out to the daughter he once knew. In the letter, he expressed what he had carried for years: love, regret, and a plea for understanding. He told her how proud he was of her achievements, how devastated he was by the distance between them, and how deeply he wished she would acknowledge the bond they had once shared. He recounted memories of her childhood, the first day of school, the times he had stayed up late helping her with homework, the small victories and big dreams they celebrated together. But he also included warnings, gentle ones, yet pointed. He reminded her that public scrutiny could be unforgiving, that fame carried hidden costs, and that actions, no matter how calculated, had consequences. He urged her to consider the emotional toll of her meticulously crafted public persona. In his mind, this was a father's final attempt to reconnect, to remind his daughter of her roots and the human connections she had jeopardized in her pursuit of global adoration. He sealed the envelope, addressed it carefully, and sent it via certified mail, ensuring it would reach her personally. The hope, however, that it would spark a heartfelt response quickly turned to dismay. Instead of acknowledgement, he received silence. Weeks turned into months. And then, the world caught wind of the letter, not because Meghan responded, but because it became a legal issue. In an unprecedented move, Meghan Markle filed a lawsuit against the Daily Mail for publishing excerpts from her private correspondence with her father. She claimed that her privacy had been violated and that the publication of her personal letters caused her emotional distress. The legal battle was swift and severe. The press painted Thomas as both a victim and a villain, a man caught between fatherly love and public embarrassment. Some outlets labeled him opportunistic, others sympathetic, but the story itself became explosive. A duchess suing a major publication over private family correspondence. For Thomas, the lawsuit was devastating on multiple levels. First, it reinforced the distance that had already been imposed between him and his daughter. The letter, meant to bridge the gap, had become another wedge. Second, it revealed to him that in Meghan's world, loyalty and affection were subordinate to image and control. The father who had nurtured her, protected her, and guided her early life was now a legal adversary, not because he had intended harm, but because the act of expressing love and concern had violated the public image she worked tirelessly to maintain. Yet, the letter itself contained more than personal reflections. According to Thomas, hidden within the lines of affection were subtle clues about Meghan's ambitions. Small remarks about legacy, influence, and public perception hinted at the overarching strategy he had suspected for years, the Princess Diana 2.0 blueprint. Certain phrases, he claimed, could only be interpreted as calculated steps toward global recognition and public admiration. One particular passage haunted him. Meghan had written about the need to navigate public perception carefully and to ensure that every gesture is intentional. To Thomas, these words weren't innocent advice. They were confirmation. Confirmation that the young girl he had raised was now orchestrating her life and public image with a precision that mirrored the very obsession he had warned her about for years. The lawsuit became a media spectacle. Journalists dissected every sentence of the letter, analyzing what it revealed about Meghan's psyche, her relationship with her father, and her strategic mastery over public perception. Commentators debated whether Thomas's revelations were credible, with some asserting that he was simply a bitter man seeking attention. Others argued that his perspective offered unprecedented insight into the carefully managed image of one of the most scrutinized women in the world. For Thomas, the public spectacle was secondary to the personal toll. He had reached out in love and received legal retaliation in return. The father who had once been a guiding presence was now an outsider, legally restricted from discussing his daughter's private communications. And yet, despite the pain, Thomas remained steadfast in his belief that the truth mattered. In interviews following the lawsuit, he repeatedly emphasized that his intention had never been to embarrass Meghan publicly. Instead, he framed his actions as a necessary disclosure, a means to shed light on the strategies, calculations, and intentions of a woman who had transformed into a global figure, but whose personal ties, including the most fundamental of all, family, had been severed. "It's not about revenge," he told a reporter. "It's about reality. My daughter is an incredible woman, but I need the world to understand who she is, beyond the image, beyond the titles, beyond the fairy tale. I need the truth to be heard." And the truth, Thomas argues, was contained in every carefully worded line of that letter. The affection, the warnings, the observations about her growing obsession with public image, the subtle acknowledgments of the lengths she was willing to go to achieve the status and recognition she coveted. The lawsuit, however, only amplified public scrutiny. Media outlets speculated endlessly about the implications of Meghan's actions. The estrangement from her father, the aggressive protection of her private life, and the meticulous planning behind her public persona. Social media exploded with heated debates. Fans and critics alike dissected the ethics of her legal actions. Was she justified in suing to protect her privacy, or had she gone too far, silencing the voice of a father who had been excluded from her life? Thomas, for his part, watched the spectacle unfold with a mixture of grief and resignation. He had hoped for reconciliation. Instead, he saw the distance between him and his daughter crystallized in court documents, media analyses, and the public conversation. And yet, even in the midst of this turmoil, Thomas held on to the central revelation, the very statement that had become the fulcrum of his fears. That phone call, the obsessive attention to Diana, and now the calculated legal maneuvers all pointed to one conclusion. Meghan was executing a strategy that had been years in the making, one designed to position herself as the next Diana in the public eye. Some might argue that a father's interpretation is biased. Some might say that grief and exclusion can distort perspective. But Thomas remained unwavering. He saw the consistency in her actions, the recurrence of patterns, and the precision with which she manipulated public perception. And the evidence of this strategy was written in her own hand, detailed in the very letter he had sent. Ironically, the document that now fueled legal debate rather than personal connection. The irony was bitter. A father writes to his daughter with hope, love, and the desire for reconciliation. The letter becomes public. The world scrutinizes it. The daughter responds not with understanding, but with legal action. And yet, through all of this, the central narrative emerges with unmistakable clarity. Meghan's fascination with Diana, her strategic cultivation of public perception, and her calculated approach to relationships, including with her own father, were not fleeting interests. They were deliberate steps in a premeditated plan. Even as Thomas Markle absorbed the legal and emotional fallout, he remained clear-eyed. He understood that the path his daughter had chosen was one she had prepared for decades. The Princess Diana 2.0 plan wasn't spontaneous. It was a lifetime in the making, starting from childhood admiration, evolving into careful observation, and culminating in a global stage where every gesture was calculated, every emotion curated, and every public appearance orchestrated to perfection. And as he prepared for yet another day of media appearances, interviews, and public scrutiny, Thomas knew the story was far from over. The letter and the lawsuit were only the beginning. Behind the legal documents and press coverage lay a deeper, more personal truth, one that would reveal not only Meghan's ambitions, but also the profound estrangement between father and daughter, and the length she was willing to go to achieve the image she had envisioned from childhood.